save my sister first?
Jae Min's Rolls-Royce cut through the frozen streets of Gangnam like a blade. 20 years in Seoul's underworld had taught him one rule: never look down except to count bodies. But that night, something made him stop. Two small shapes collapsed against the brick wall. One child curved protectively over another, both shaking, both dying. He stepped out into the snow. His $1,000 shoes crunched on ice. The older girl looked up. Her lips were blue from frostbite. Her fingers were turning black. But her eyes held something he hadn't seen in decades. Not fear, determination. She whispered 5 words that would haunt him forever. Please, save my sister first. In that moment, the most dangerous man in Seoul realized something terrifying. A dying 8-year-old girl was braver than he'd ever been, and she was about to change everything. Before we continue, if that little girl's courage touched your heart even for a second, don't scroll past this story. Hit the subscribe button now. It helps these stories keep reaching people who need hope. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm reading every one. Jae Min's knees hit the frozen pavement. He couldn't remember the last time he'd knelt for anyone. Kings didn't kneel. Predators didn't kneel. Men who controlled half of Seoul's underworld with an iron fist and a reputation built on bodies didn't kneel in slush-filled alleys for 2 dying children. But here he was. His custom Brioni coat soaked up the icy water pooling around the girls. $3,000 of Italian wool ruined in seconds. He didn't notice. Couldn't notice. Because Christine's words were still echoing in his skull like a gunshot in an empty room. Please save my sister first. The smaller girl, Stella, he would later learn, lay motionless in Christine's arms. Her lips had gone beyond blue. They were gray now, the color of ash, the color of death. Each breath came shallow and wet, a rattling sound Jae Min recognized from too many men bleeding out in too many dark places. But this wasn't a grown man who'd chosen the life. This was a child. And something about that difference cracked open a door in his chest he'd welded shut 23 years ago. He was 12 when he watched his own sister die. Different city, different alley, same cold, same helplessness. She'd been 7, small like Stella, and she'd looked at him with trust in her eyes, even as hypothermia stole the warmth from her body. Their father had sold them both to cover a gambling debt. Jae Min survived. She didn't. He never let himself remember her face. Until now. "Get the car ready," he barked at his driver, his voice rougher than he intended. "Now!" The driver's eyes widened in the rear view mirror, but he moved fast, engine already running, back door swinging open. Jae Min reached for Stella, his hands that had broken bones and pulled triggers, trembling as they slid beneath her small body. She weighed nothing. Less than nothing. A ghost wrapped in threadbare fabric and borrowed time. "No!" Christine's hand shot out, fingers locking around his sleeve with shocking strength. "No, please don't take her. Don't separate us. I'll go with you. I'll do anything. Just don't. I'm not separating you." The words came out softer than any he'd spoken in years. "You're both coming. Both of you." Christine's eyes searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, the inevitable betrayal. She'd learned not to trust. He could see it written in every line of her small, exhausted face. He met her gaze, and held it. "I promise." It was a strange thing, making promises. Jae Min dealt in threats and contracts, leverage and fear. Promises were for people who believed in something other than power. But watching this 8-year-old girl protect her dying sister with nothing but her own freezing body, he found himself believing in something he couldn't name. "Get in the car," he said, gentler now. "Hold her hand. I've got her." Christine scrambled up, never letting go of Stella's coat, and climbed into the warm interior of the Rolls-Royce. Jae Min followed, cradling Stella against his chest. The contrast was obscene. This dying child against leather seats that cost more than most families earned in a year. "Drive," he commanded. "The facility. Fast." The car lurched forward, engine purring as they tore through empty streets. Jae Min's driver knew better than to ask questions. 20 minutes to the private medical facility he maintained for his men. 20 minutes for injuries that couldn't be explained to normal hospitals, for problems that required discretion. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Christine pressed herself against his side, her small hand wrapped around Stella's wrist, checking for a pulse over and over like a ritual. Like if she stopped checking, her sister would disappear. "She's still breathing," Jae Min said quietly. "You kept her alive. You did that." Christine's head turned toward him, eyes too old for her face. "Will she die?" He could have lied. Should have lied. Given her empty comfort the way adults always did with children, making promises they couldn't keep. Instead, he said, "Not if I can help it." Something shifted in Christine's expression. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of hope, which was almost more dangerous. The city blurred past the windows, towers of glass and steel, neon signs bleeding color into the night, the glittering facade of a Seoul that had no room for children freezing in alleys. Jae Min had helped build this city. He'd taken his cut from every dark corner, every desperate transaction, every person ground down by the machinery of survival. These girls were freezing in his territory, under his watch, because of a world he'd helped create. And suddenly, for the first time in 2 decades, Jae Min wanted an answer to a question he'd never bothered asking before. Why? Why were they there? Why was no one looking for them? Why did a child have to choose which of them deserved to be saved? He would find out, and someone, whoever was responsible for putting these girls on that frozen pavement, was going to pay for it. The breaking point wasn't their suffering, it was that he suddenly, desperately cared about making it stop. The facility was 3 stories beneath a legitimate pharmaceutical warehouse in Gangnam's industrial sector. No signs, no emergency lights, just a steel door that required 3 separate codes and a retinal scan. Jae Min had built it 5 years ago for exactly one purpose, to treat injuries that couldn't be explained to hospitals. Bullet wounds, knife injuries, the aftermath of interrogations that went too far. He'd never imagined carrying a dying child through those doors. "Dr. Yoon!" His voice echoed off concrete walls as they descended the final staircase. "Emergency! Pediatric! Now!" Dr. Yoon appeared from the main examination room, already pulling on gloves, her expression shifting from irritation to shock when she saw what Jae Min carried. She was in her 50s, a former trauma surgeon who'd lost her medical license after treating one of Jae Min's men without reporting the gunshot wound. He'd given her a choice: prison or working for him. She'd chosen survival. She'd never forgiven him for it, but right now her personal feelings didn't matter. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, gesturing him toward the examination table. "Put her here. Gently. Jae Min lowered Stella onto the sterile surface. And the girl looked even smaller under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her skin had taken on a translucent quality, blue veins visible beneath the surface like a road map of failing circulation. Dr. Yoon's fingers flew across Stella's small body, checking pulse points, peeling back eyelids, pressing a stethoscope against her chest. Her face darkened with each passing second. Severe pneumonia, both lungs compromised. Malnutrition, prolonged, probably months. Early hypothermia. She looked up sharply at Jae Min. How long was she exposed? I don't know. Hours, maybe longer. Jesus. Dr. Yoon was already moving, calling for her nurse, pulling IV equipment from sterile packages. She needs immediate intervention or she's going to crash. Antibiotics, fluids, warming blankets. Do whatever it takes, Jae Min said. Money isn't an issue. Money never is with you. Dr. Yoon's voice carried an edge, but her hands remained steady as she inserted an IV line into Stella's tiny arm. What's an issue is that this child has been starving for months. Where did you find her? An alley, in Gangnam. Dr. Yoon's eyes flashed with something dark, anger, disgust, he couldn't tell. Of course you did. Jae Min wanted to snap back, to remind her who paid for this facility, who kept her out of prison, who... But Christine's hand gripped his jacket harder, and he felt the words die in his throat. The medical team swarmed Stella, a choreographed dance of tubes and monitors and urgent medical jargon that Jae Min didn't understand. He stepped back, letting them work, and found himself standing at the observation window that overlooked the examination room. Christine pressed herself against the glass, her breath fogging the surface in small, rhythmic clouds. She hadn't cried, hadn't screamed, hadn't broken down, just stood there, watching, her small fingers splayed against the window like she could reach through it and hold her sister's hand. That bothered him more than tears would have. Tears he understood. Tears were release, catharsis, the body's natural response to overwhelming emotion. But this silent, stone-faced vigil, this was a child who'd learned that crying didn't help, that emotions were luxuries she couldn't afford. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, Dr. Yoon emerged, stripping off her gloves with sharp, efficient movements. Her expression was carefully neutral, the face of someone delivering news that could go either way. She's stable. For now. Dr. Yoon's eyes moved to Christine, softening slightly. Your sister is very sick, sweetheart. But we're going to do everything we can. Christine nodded once, still not crying. Will she die? The bluntness of the question made Dr. Yoon pause. She crouched down to Christine's level, something Jae Min had never seen her do. Not if I can help it. But I need information, medical history. Do you know if she's allergic to any medications? No allergies. Christine's voice was mechanical, reciting facts. Mama kept records, but Uncle threw them away when we left. Left where? The apartment, near the Hangang, in the old factory district. Jae Min felt something cold settle in his stomach. Dr. Yoon continued her questions gently. What about your mother? Is she? Mama died 4 months ago. Tuberculosis. She worked at the textile factory until she got too sick. Christine's eyes remained fixed on the observation window, on her sister's small form surrounded by machines. Uncle said we were too expensive, said he couldn't feed us and pay his debts, so we left. The clinical precision of her words made them worse. This was a child who'd had to become an adult too fast, who'd memorized survival information the way other kids memorized nursery rhymes. Jae Min's jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The old factory district near the Hangang. He knew it intimately. His organization ran protection rackets through every business in that area, collecting weekly payments from factory owners, shopkeepers, restaurant managers. Money that flowed up through his network like blood through veins, feeding the empire he'd built. These children had been starving in his territory, under his watch, in buildings where his men collected tribute every single week. Someone should have seen them. Someone should have reported it. Someone should have... "How long were you on the street?" Dr. Yoon asked softly. 2 weeks and 3 days. 17 days. These girls had survived 17 days on Seoul's winter streets while his organization operated around them like they were invisible. Dr. Yoon stood slowly, her expression unreadable as she looked at Jae Min. "She'll need to stay here for at least a week, maybe longer depending on how she responds to treatment. The malnutrition is serious. Her body's been consuming itself to stay alive." Jae Min nodded, not trusting his voice. "I'll need to report this," Dr. Yoon continued quietly. "Child endangerment, abandonment, no." The word came out harder than he intended. "Not yet. Give me time to handle it." Dr. Yoon's expression hardened. "Handle it how?" Jae Min looked down at Christine, at this 8-year-old girl who'd kept her sister alive through sheer force of will, and felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. Something he hadn't felt since he was young enough to believe the world could be fair. Jae Min made the call at 3 in the morning. "Min-ho, I need a full background check. 2 girls, Christine and Stella Lee. Mother deceased. Last known address somewhere in the old factory district near Hangang. I want everything. Family history, financial records, employment history, known associates. Everything that exists, I want it on my desk in 6 hours." His second-in-command didn't ask questions. 20 years of working together had taught Min-ho when to stay silent. "Consider it done, boss." Jae Min ended the call and looked through the observation window. Stella hadn't moved in 2 hours. Christine had finally fallen asleep in the chair beside him, her head tilted at an angle that would leave her neck aching, one hand still clutching the fabric of his ruined coat. He should have left. Should have delegated this to Dr. Yoon and his men and returned to the business of running an empire. Territory disputes didn't pause for personal crises. Money didn't collect itself. Rivals didn't stop plotting just because their enemy had discovered a conscience. But he stayed. Dawn broke cold and gray over Seoul. Light filtering through the facility's high windows, industrial glass blocks that let in illumination, but revealed nothing of the world above. Jae Min had been awake for 36 hours straight. His eyes burned, his muscles ached, his custom suit looked like he'd fought a war in it. He'd worn worse for less important reasons. Min-ho arrived at 9 sharp, entering the observation room with a manila folder thick enough to contain a life. He glanced at Christine, still sleeping, and kept his voice low. "Boss, you're not going to like this. Just give it to me." Min-ho opened the folder. Lee Soo-jin, age 34 at time of death, single mother, worked at Daewon Textiles for 11 years, same factory, same position, floor supervisor. Died 4 months ago from complications of tuberculosis, likely contracted from unsafe working conditions. The factory has had 3 OSHA violations in the past 5 years, all swept under the rug. Jae Min's jaw tightened. "Continue." The apartment. Min-ho pulled out a property document, and Jae Min saw his own Shell Corporation's name stamped at the top. "Building complex owned by Han Seong Holdings. That's yours. Rent was kept deliberately low. According to our records, it was part of your strategy for maintaining goodwill in the district while running protection rackets through local businesses." The words hit like bullets. his building, his strategy, his profit. After the mother's death, the girls moved in with her brother. Park Dae-jung, age 42. Known gambler, multiple debts with local loan sharks. Minho's voice remained carefully neutral, reporting facts without judgment. He took the mother's savings, approximately 3 million won, and used it to pay gambling debts. Threw the girls out 17 days ago. 17 days. That number again? What else? Minho hesitated. That pause told Jae Min everything he needed to know before the words even came. While they were on the street, Christine worked. Odd jobs, delivering flyers, sorting recycling, helping at a street vendor's stall. She made approximately 15,000 won over 2 weeks. Used it to buy food for her sister, not herself. They slept in doorways, under bridges, in subway stations until security moved them along. Minho pulled out photos, surveillance footage from street cameras, grainy but clear enough. Christine carrying boxes too heavy for her small frame. Christine digging through recycling bins. Christine huddled with Stella under a bridge, using her own body as a blanket. Jae Min's hands curled into fists. One more thing, boss. Minho's voice dropped lower. Our men do weekly collections in that district. Protection money from every business, including the factory where the mother worked. They would have walked past these girls, multiple times. The silence that followed was suffocating. Jae Min took the folder from Minho's hands and dismissed him with a single gesture. When the door closed, he stood alone in the observation room, except for Christine, still sleeping, unaware that he was learning the full measure of his sins. He opened the folder again, studied the employment records, the financial statements, the cold, bureaucratic language that turned human suffering into data points. Lee Soo-jin worked herself to death in a factory that paid tribute to his organization, lived in an apartment building he owned, kept affordable to buy the loyalty of people he was simultaneously exploiting, died leaving 2 daughters with nothing except an uncle who saw them as burdens. And for 17 days, those daughters suffered on streets his men patrolled, collecting money, extracting tribute, walking past 2 freezing children like they were part of the scenery. Jae Min looked at Christine's hands where they rested on the arm of the chair. Small hands, child's hands, but covered in calluses and frostbite scars. The hands of someone who'd worked until her skin split open, who'd endured cold that turned flesh black at the edges. He'd built his empire on calculated cruelty and on understanding that power came from controlling the desperate, from being the knife or the shelter, depending on which served his interests better. He'd told himself it was business, strategy, survival in a world that rewarded strength and punished weakness. But this was a child's hands scarred by his indifference. He thought of all the buildings he owned, all the businesses that paid him tribute, all the people who worked themselves to exhaustion in his territory while he counted his profits from a penthouse that cost more than they'd earn in 10 lifetimes. How many other families had he broken without noticing? How many other children had suffered while his empire grew fat on their desperation? Jae Min caught his reflection in the observation window. A man in an expensive suit, powerful and feared, untouchable. And for the first time in 20 years, he hated what he saw. Not because of what he'd done. He'd made peace with his violence long ago, accepted that he was a monster operating in a world of monsters, but because he'd done it without even looking, without even seeing the cost. Behind him, Christine stirred, and he watched her reflection wake beside his. A child who'd survived on strength he couldn't comprehend, who'd kept her sister alive with nothing but will and love and the kind of courage he'd lost before he turned 13. She'd been invisible to his empire, but she'd seen everything. Night fell again, and Jae Min remained. 48 hours in the underground facility. His phone buzzed constantly. Territory disputes, collection schedules, a shipment arriving at the port that needed his signature. He ignored all of it. Let his lieutenants handle the empire he'd spent 2 decades building. Let the money flow or stop flowing. Let rivals make their moves. None of it mattered as much as watching Stella's chest rise and fall. The machines breathed for her, steady, mechanical, reliable in a way the world had never been. Each rise of her small ribcage was a victory. Each fall was a prayer that the next breath would come. Jae Min had stopped praying at 13. That was the year his father dragged him to a warehouse in Busan's industrial district, the year he learned that parents could look at their children and see currency instead of love. His father owed money to the Cheongryong gang, a gambling debt that had ballooned beyond any hope of repayment. The boss had offered a solution. The debt would be forgiven in exchange for one thing: his son. Jae Min remembered his father's face when he agreed. Not shame, not regret, just relief that the problem was solved. He'd stopped believing in gods that day. What kind of divine justice allowed fathers to sell their sons? What kind of mercy let children be traded like property? But now, watching Stella fight for each breath, he found himself whispering words he'd forgotten he knew. Please, please let her live. Please. He didn't know who he was talking to. Maybe the gods he'd abandoned. Maybe the universe that had shown him nothing but cruelty. Maybe just the darkness of the observation room, where confessions went unheard and desperation had nowhere else to go. If she survives, I'll make sure they never know hunger again, never know cold, never know what it feels like to be thrown away. It was a vow. A contract written in silence and witnessed by no one. But Jae Min had built his empire on keeping his word. Even the words no one else heard. Christine shifted in the chair beside him, exhaustion finally claiming what willpower couldn't sustain. Her small body tilted, searching for comfort in sleep, and her head came to rest against his arm. Jae Min froze. The weight of her was nothing, a child's head against his bicep, warm and trusting in a way that terrified him. He should have moved, should have adjusted position, maintained distance, preserved the careful separation between who he was and what he'd allowed himself to feel. But he didn't move. Couldn't move. Because Christine had spent 17 days protecting her sister with nothing but her own body as shelter. The least he could do was offer his arm for a few hours. Let her rest without fear of falling. Let her be a child for one night instead of a soldier guarding the only thing she had left. His arm went numb after an hour. He still didn't move. The door opened just after midnight. Min Ho entered, his face tight with the kind of controlled urgency that meant serious trouble. He glanced at Christine, still sleeping against Jae Min's arm, and his expression flickered with something between confusion and concern. "Boss, we have a situation." Jae Min kept his eyes on Stella's monitors. Heart rate steady, oxygen levels holding. "Talk." "The Dongsung crew is making moves on our territory in Yeongdongpo. They hit 2 of our collection sites tonight, roughed up our guys, told the business owners that protection rates just went up. For them, not us." Minho's voice was carefully controlled. But Jae Min could hear the anger underneath. "It's a direct challenge. They're testing to see if you're weak." "Handle it." Minho blinked. "Boss? You heard me. Handle it. This isn't a minor dispute. Dongsung has been waiting for an opening for months. If we don't respond with overwhelming force, Every crew in Seoul will think you've gone soft." Min-ho took a step closer, his voice dropping. "Boss, this could mean war." Jae Min finally turned his head, meeting Min-ho's eyes with the kind of cold calculation that had built his reputation. "Then start one." Min-ho's eyes widened. In 20 years, he'd never seen Jae Min delegate something this critical. Wars were won or lost in the first response. Hesitation meant weakness. Weakness meant death. I want you to do whatever is necessary to remind Dongsung why they've been afraid of us for the past decade. I want you to make an example so clear that no other crew even thinks about testing us." Jae Min's voice was steel wrapped in ice. "And I want you to do it without me. But boss, I'm staying here." The words hung in the air like a confession. Min-ho looked at Christine sleeping against Jae Min's arm, at Stella fighting for life behind the glass, and something shifted in his expression. Not judgment, not quite understanding either. Just recognition that whatever was happening in this observation room was bigger than territory disputes and gang wars. "How much authority am I authorized to use?" "All of it." Min-ho nodded slowly. "And if they push back hard?" Jae Min's expression didn't change. "Then push harder. Make them regret they ever heard our name." "Casualties?" "Do what needs to be done." It was the same answer he'd given 1,000 times before. Cold, practical, ruthless. But this time it felt different. This time he was choosing to stay in a hospital room watching a child breathe instead of leading his men into battle. This time, he was trusting someone else to be the monster so he could be something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet. Min-ho turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Boss, the guys are talking. They're saying you've changed. And some of them think it makes you weak." Min-ho's voice carried no judgment, just information. A boss who cares about something is a boss who can be hurt. Jae Min looked at Stella's small form, at Christine's head resting against his numb arm, and felt something settle in his chest. Something solid and unmovable. Let them think it. Anyone who mistakes compassion for weakness will learn the difference the hard way. Min-ho smiled slightly, a rare expression on his usually stone-faced second. "I'll make sure the message is clear." After he left, the observation room fell silent again, except for the steady rhythm of machines. Jae Min watched Stella breathe and felt Christine's weight against his arm and understood that everything had changed. His men were right. He had become vulnerable. Anyone who wanted to hurt him now had a target. 2 small girls who depended on him for survival. But vulnerability was the price of having something worth protecting. And for the first time in his life, Jae Min decided it was a price worth paying. The breaking point wasn't their sufferings. It was that he suddenly, desperately cared about making it stop. Dawn broke on the 3rd day, and Stella opened her eyes. "Honey?" The word was barely a whisper, thin and fragile as spun glass. But Christine heard it. She'd been sitting beside Stella's bed for 6 hours straight, refusing to leave even when Dr. Yoon tried to coax her into eating breakfast. "Stella!" Christine grabbed her sister's hand, pressing it against her cheek. "I'm here. I'm right here." Jae Min watched from the doorway as the sisters reunited, Christine sobbing for the first time since that night in the alley, Stella confused but clinging to her older sister with what little strength she had, both of them holding each other like the world might try to tear them apart again. Something cracked inside his chest. Not broke, not shattered, just cracked. Like a wall he'd spent decades building, stone by stone, suddenly developing its first fracture, Light getting in where there'd only been darkness. Warmth touching places that had been frozen for so long he'd forgotten they could thaw. He turned away, giving them privacy. His hand pressed against the doorframe to steady himself. When had he become this? A man who could be unmade by two children embracing. "Boss?" The voice came from behind him, one of his security guards, young and nervous. "Boss, we have a situation at the entrance. Someone demanding to see you. He's claiming—" "I know what he's claiming." The voice came from down the hallway, loud and slurred with the particular aggression of a drunk man trying to sound sober. "I'm claiming my nieces, my blood, my family." Jae Min's entire body went rigid. He knew that voice before he saw the face. Park Dae-jung, the uncle. The man who'd thrown two children into a Seoul winter because they were too expensive to feed. Jae Min moved down the corridor toward the lobby, each step measured and controlled. Through the security door's window, he could see three men. Dae-jung in the center, mid-40s, bloated face, cheap suit that hung wrong on his frame. Flanking him were two others Jae Min recognized instantly, Kim and Choi, low-level enforcers from the Dongseong crew, the same organization that had tested his territory 2 nights ago while he sat in the observation room. This wasn't a coincidence. This was strategy. Jae Min pushed through the security door, and the three men turned. Dae-jung's face twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. His breath reeked of soju even from 6 feet away. "There he is, the big man, the hero." Dae-jung's voice dripped with false bravado. "Kidnapping children now? That's low even for you, Jae Min." "Those girls were dying in an alley." Jae Min's voice was flat, emotionless. "You threw them there." "I didn't throw them anywhere. They left on their own. Ungrateful little—" Dae-jung caught himself, glancing at his escorts. "They're my family, my responsibility. You have no right to keep them." Jae Min looked past Dae-jung to the two enforcers. Kim met his eyes without flinching, a telltale sign of someone who thought they had leverage. Choi smirked. So that's how it was. Dong-sung had found the uncle, probably through street contacts who'd heard about a Mafia boss showing unusual mercy. They'd sobered him up just enough to be coherent, armed him with legal paperwork, and sent him here to create a problem that couldn't be solved with violence. Make Jae Min look weak for caring. Force him to either surrender the girls or publicly fight a legal battle over custody, exposing the fact that the feared Mafia boss had developed an attachment. Either outcome was a win for Dong-sung. It was actually clever, and it made Jae Min want to break every bone in Dae-jung's body. "I have documents." Dae-jung pulled crumpled papers from his jacket, waving them like a weapon. "Legal guardianship papers, birth certificates. I'm their blood relative, their only family. You're nothing, just some criminal who picked them up off the street." "I picked them up off the street where you left them to die." "That's not— I never—" Dae-jung's face flushed. "You can't prove anything. And the law doesn't care what you think happened. The law says I'm their guardian. The law says they're mine." Behind them, Jae Min heard a small sound. He turned. Christine stood in the hallway, Dr. Yoon beside her trying to hold her back. But Christine had frozen in place, her eyes locked on her uncle. All the color had drained from her face. She looked exactly like she had that night in the alley. Small and terrified and desperately trying to be brave. She took a step backward, then another. Then she ran. Not toward Dae-jung, but away from him, ducking under Dr. Yoon's arm and disappearing back toward Stella's room. The fear in her eyes told Jae Min everything he needed to know about what life with this man had been like. Dae-jung laughed, harsh and bitter. See? That's what I'm dealing with. Disrespectful children who don't know their place. But don't worry, I'll teach them. Discipline, that's what they need. A firm hand. Something cold and lethal settled over Jae Min. He'd spent 3 days watching these girls fight for survival. He'd seen Christine's frostbitten hands and Stella's malnourished body. He'd read the file detailing their 2 weeks on the street. He'd listened to Christine recite their mother's death with the mechanical precision of a soldier reporting casualties. And now this man, this pathetic, drunken parasite, wanted to talk about discipline. Jae Min took a single step forward. Kim and Choi moved their hands toward their jackets, reaching for weapons they thought would protect them. Daejung stumbled backward, false bravado cracking. "You can't touch me," Daejung said, voice rising. "You put a hand on me, and I'll have every cop in Seoul down here. I'll make sure everyone knows what you are. You think you can play hero? You think you can steal children and get away with it?" Jae Min stopped inches from Daejung's face. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only the 3 men could hear. "If you ever come near those girls again, I will make you disappear. Not kill you. That would be too kind. I'll put you somewhere dark and forgotten where you'll have years to think about what you did to them, where every day will feel like a week, and every week will feel like a year." Daejung's face went white. "Now get out of my facility. This isn't over." Daejung's voice shook despite his words. "I have rights. I have the law. You can't—" "Boss," Minho appeared from a side door, 6 armed men behind him. "Is there a problem?" The 2 Dongsung enforcers assessed the situation. 7 against 2, in enemy territory, with no backup. Kim's hand dropped away from his jacket. Choi stopped smirking. But Daejung pulled out his papers one more time, clutching them like a shield. "I'll be back with police," he said. "With lawyers, with court orders. The law is on my side. You can't fight the law." He was right. That was what made Jae Min's blood run cold. Violence he could handle. Rival gangs he could crush. But the law? The law said blood relatives had rights. The law said a mafia boss had no claim to children who weren't his. The law might hand Christine and Stella back to this monster because paperwork and blood ties mattered more than what was right. Jae Min watched Daejung retreat toward the elevator, flanked by his Dongsung escorts, and realized the real threat wasn't standing in front of him. It was written in legal code and enforced by judges who would see a criminal and a blood relative and choose wrong. Behind him, he heard Christine crying quietly in Stella's room. And Jae Min understood that saving them wasn't going to be as simple as keeping them safe from the cold. He was going to have to fight the entire system to keep them. She'd been invisible to his empire, but she'd seen everything. And now, so did he. The elevator doors had barely closed before they opened again. Jae Min was still standing in the lobby, calculating his next move, when he heard Daejung's voice echo from the elevator shaft. Angry, emboldened by whatever the Dongsung enforcers had promised him on the ride down. "I'm not leaving without my nieces!" The doors opened. Daejung stormed out. Kim and Choi flanking him like attack dogs on leashes. They were headed straight for the ICU corridor, toward Stella's room, toward Christine. Jae Min moved. Not fast. Not with the explosive violence he was capable of. Just a smooth, deliberate step that put his body directly in the doorway. Arms loose at his sides, expression empty. But everything about his stance radiated one clear message. You will not pass. Daejung stopped 3 feet away, close enough to smell the soju on his breath. Get out of my way. Jae Min didn't move, didn't speak, just looked at Dae-jung with the kind of empty stare that had made men confess to crimes they didn't commit just to make it stop. Kim stepped forward, hand sliding inside his jacket. "You heard him. Move. You're going to walk away." Jae Min's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. The kind of tone someone uses to discuss the weather. "You're going to get back in that elevator, leave this building, and never come near these girls again." Choi laughed. "Or what? You're outnumbered, old man. Just you against 3 of us. Maybe you were scary once, but—" "Or," Jae Min continued, as if Choi hadn't spoken, his eyes never leaving Dae-jung's face. "I'm going to break both your legs, put you in a basement where nobody will hear you scream, and make sure you understand, really deeply understand, what it means to hurt children." The temperature in the lobby dropped 10 degrees. Kim's hand emerged from his jacket, fingers wrapped around a pistol grip. Choi pulled a knife. The threat was clear. Weapons against bare hands. They thought they had leverage. They'd miscalculated. Jae Min made a small gesture with his left hand, barely a movement, just 2 fingers twitching. The facility's hidden doors opened simultaneously, from the stairwell, from the medical supply room, from the staff corridor, from offices that appeared empty. Men emerged, 7, 10, 15, all armed, all watching with the kind of patient stillness that came from years of knowing when violence was inevitable. Minho stepped to Jae Min's right, a pistol held low and relaxed. "Boss need something?" "These men were just leaving." Kim's gun froze halfway out of his jacket. Choi's knife suddenly seemed very small. Dae-jung's face went from red to white so fast he might have been choking. "This is... You can't..." Dae-jung's voice cracked. "Those are my nieces. I have rights. I have... You threw them away." Every head turned. Christine stood at the entrance to the ICU corridor, her small frame silhouetted against the fluorescent lights. Dr. Yoon stood behind her, one hand on Christine's shoulder, but the girl had stepped forward on her own. She looked directly at her uncle. No tears, no fear, just devastating, clear-eyed certainty. "You threw us away, Uncle." Dae-jung's mouth opened and closed. "Christine, sweetheart, that's not... I didn't. You took Mama's money." Her voice was steady, each word a hammer blow. "The money she saved for us. The money she worked herself to death for. You took it and spent it on gambling, on soju, on your debts. I was going to pay it back. I just needed time. You said we were too expensive." Christine took another step forward, and grown men moved out of her way. "You said you couldn't feed us and pay your bills. You said we weren't worth it. Those were your words. Not worth it." Jae Min watched Christine speak, and saw what he'd seen that first night in the alley. A child who'd been forced to become an adult too fast. A girl who'd learned that survival meant being brave when you wanted to break, being strong when you wanted to collapse. "We were on the street for 17 days, Christine continued. "Stella almost died. She still might die. And you didn't look for us. You didn't call the police. You didn't care." "That's not fair. I didn't know where you'd gone. You knew exactly where we were. In the cold. Hungry. Scared. You knew, and you did nothing." Christine's voice finally cracked, emotion bleeding through. And now someone finally cared. Someone finally stopped. Someone finally saved us. She turned to look at Jae Min, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. "You don't get to come back because of that. You don't get to take us away because someone finally cared." The silence that followed was absolute. Dae-jung's face twisted through a dozen emotions: shame, rage, desperation, and finally something calculating and cold. He straightened, smoothed his jacket, and put on the expression of a man who'd just remembered he had ammunition left. Very touching. Very dramatic. His voice dripped with bitter mockery. "But it doesn't matter what you think, Christine. It doesn't matter what he thinks." Dae-jung jabbed a finger toward Jae Min. "The law matters, and the law says you're mine." He pulled out the crumpled documents again, waving them like a victory flag. "I'm your legal guardian, your only living relative. And no matter how much money he has, no matter how many guns he has, he can't change that. The courts will give you back to me. And when they do..." His smile turned cruel. "When they do, you're going to learn what discipline really means." Jae Min moved before the threat was fully formed. One step. Close enough that Dae-jung stumbled backward, crashing into Kim. Close enough that Jae Min could speak in a whisper that only Dae-jung would hear. "Try. Please try. Go to the police. Go to the courts. File your paperwork. Make your claims." Jae Min's voice was soft as silk, sharp as broken glass. "And while you're doing that, I'll make a single phone call. Every debt collector in Seoul will have your name and address by morning. Every loan shark you've ever borrowed from will know exactly where to find you. Every gambling den you've ever cheated will remember your face." Dae-jung's breath caught. "You'll spend the rest of your life running from people who are much more creative with violence than I am. People who don't care about courts or laws or what's legal. People who just want their money back and aren't particular about how many pieces you're in when they collect." Jae Min stepped back, his voice returning to normal volume. "So yes, please, go to the lawyers. I'm very interested to see how that works out for you." Dae-jung opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. Kim and Choi had already started backing toward the elevator. Their earlier bravado evaporated. They recognized a losing position when they saw one. Whatever Dong-sung had promised them wasn't worth dying in an underground medical facility surrounded by 15 armed men. Dae-jung looked at Christine one last time. She stared back, unflinching. "This isn't over," he said finally, voice shaking with impotent rage. "You think you're safe with him? He's a monster, a criminal. He'll ruin you worse than I ever could." Christine's response was simple and devastating. "At least he doesn't throw children away." The elevator doors closed on Dae-jung's twisted face, and the lobby fell silent. Jae Min's men dispersed, disappearing back into the facility's shadows. Min-ho lingered for a moment, meeting Jae Min's eyes with an expression that asked a dozen questions. Jae Min shook his head once. Later. Dr. Yoon gently guided Christine back toward Stella's room, murmuring soft reassurances. But Jae Min remained in the lobby, staring at the closed elevator doors. Dae-jung was right about one thing. This wasn't over. The uncle would go to the authorities. He'd file papers, make complaints, demand his rights. And the system, the law, the courts, the bureaucracy that valued blood ties over everything else, would side with him. Legal guardianship, family rights, due process. Words that would hand 2 children back to a monster. Jae Min pulled out his phone and made a call. "Min-ho, I need our lawyer, the best one. And I need everything we can find on family custody law. Every precedent, every loophole, every angle." A pause. "Boss, you sure you want to do this legally?" Jae Min looked down the corridor where Christine had disappeared, where Stella lay fighting for each breath where two girls had finally found a moment of safety in a world that had tried to kill them. Yes, he said, we do this right. We do this by the rules. The courthouse steps were a circus. News cameras, reporters shouting questions, protesters with signs, some calling Jae Min a hero, others demanding the children be returned to real family. The story had broken 3 days after Dae Jung's complaint was filed, notorious Mafia boss fighting for custody of 2 orphaned girls. It had everything the media loved: crime, children, moral ambiguity wrapped in a bow of public spectacle. Dong-sung had orchestrated it perfectly. Force Jae Min into a public legal battle where every aspect of his life would be examined, questioned, exposed. Make him look like a criminal trying to steal children, turn his compassion into weakness that would destabilize his organization and embolden his rivals. Jae Min climbed the courthouse steps in a custom suit, his lawyer beside him, and knew he was walking into a war he might not win. The courtroom was packed, journalists in the gallery, Dae Jung sitting beside 2 expensive lawyers who had Dong-sung money written all over them, and in the front row, Christine holding Stella's hand, both girls dressed in new clothes that still couldn't hide how thin they'd become. Judge Kim Sun-hee entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for being uncompromising. She'd seen every angle, heard every lie, and had no patience for games. This is a custody hearing, not a media trial, she said before anyone could speak. I'm here to determine what's best for these children. Nothing else matters. Are we clear? Everyone nodded. Dae Jung's lawyer went first. Attorney Park was smooth, practiced, and devastatingly effective. Your Honor, this case is simple. Park Dae Jung is Christine and Stella's legal guardian, their only living blood relative. While his circumstances are imperfect, he represents family, continuity, cultural tradition. Park paused for effect. The petitioner, on the other hand, is a known criminal. His organization has been linked to racketeering, extortion, and violence. Is this the environment we want to place vulnerable children in? He presented documents, police reports, newspaper articles about Jae Min's alleged activities, a carefully constructed portrait of a dangerous man trying to play savior. Mr. Park has acknowledged his gambling problem and is seeking treatment. He's their blood, their family. That has to mean something. Jae Min's lawyer, Ms. Choi, stood. A woman in her 40s with steel in her spine and 30 years of experience. Blood doesn't mean safety, Your Honor. Blood doesn't feed children or keep them warm. She pulled out her own documents. Park Dae Jung threw his nieces onto the street in January. He took their mother's savings, 3 million won meant for their care, and gambled it away. Christine and Stella survived 17 days on the street. 17 days of begging, scavenging, and freezing. One of them nearly died. She showed medical records, photos of Christine's frost-bitten hands, Stella's malnutrition charts. My client isn't perfect, but he stopped when everyone else walked by. He saved their lives, and he's prepared to give them everything Mr. Park never could. Safety, education, opportunity. The judge listened impassively. I'll hear from Mr. Park Dae Jung. Dae Jung took the stand, and Jae Min watched him perform. The apologetic uncle. The man who made mistakes but loved his family. The reformed gambler seeking redemption. It was a good performance. It might have worked if Christine hadn't been sitting 10 feet away, watching her uncle lie with the kind of hollow expression that came from knowing exactly how worthless those words were. "And now," Judge Kim said, "I'd like to hear from Christine." The courtroom fell silent. Christine walked to the witness stand, and she looked impossibly small, sitting in the chair meant for adults. The judge spoke gently, asking simple questions about where she'd lived, what had happened after her mother died. Christine answered in that same mechanical voice she'd used in Dr. Yoon's clinic. Facts, dates, details delivered without emotion, because emotion was a luxury she'd learned to bury. But then Judge Kim asked, "Christine, do you want to live with your uncle?" Christine's composure cracked. "No." The word came out sharp and clear. "No, Your Honor." "Can you tell me why?" Christine looked at Dae Jung, sitting smug beside his lawyers, and something fierce flashed in her eyes. "He threw us away. When Mama died and we had nowhere to go, he took her money and said we were too expensive. He said we weren't worth feeding." Her voice grew stronger. "We lived on the street for 2 weeks. Stella got sick. So sick I thought she was going to die. I tried to keep her warm, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to do." Tears started falling, but she didn't stop talking. "And then he came." Christine turned to look directly at Jae Min. "He stopped his car. He got out. He helped us when everyone else just walked past. Everyone else saw us and kept walking. But he stopped." Jae Min felt his throat constrict. "He saved Stella. He saved me." Christine's voice cracked, raw with emotion. "I don't care what he's done. I don't care about his past or his business or anything else. He's the only person who stopped. He's the only one who cared." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Kim's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes had shifted. "Thank you, Christine. You may step down." Then it was Jae Min's turn. He took the stand knowing that everything he said would be used against him, by rivals, by police, by anyone looking for leverage. But Christine had just laid her heart bare. The least he could do was match her honesty. "Mr. Jae, are the allegations about your criminal activities accurate?" "Some of them." Attorney Park looked triumphant. Ms. Choi winced. "I've done things I'm not proud of," Jae Min continued. "I've hurt people. I've broken laws. I've built my life on a foundation that wouldn't survive moral scrutiny." Judge Kim leaned forward. "And you think this qualifies you to raise 2 young girls?" "No." The admission surprised everyone. "Nothing qualifies me. I'm not a good man pretending to be one. I'm a bad man trying to do one good thing." He looked at Christine and Stella sitting in the front row. "But I can give them safety. Real safety, not the kind that disappears when bills come due. I can give them education, the best schools, the best opportunities. I can give them a future where they never have to choose between food and warmth, where they never have to sleep under bridges or beg strangers for help." Jae Min turned back to Judge Kim. "What can he give them?" He gestured toward Dae Jung. "Another cold street? Another winter wondering if anyone cares whether they live or die? He had them. He threw them away. I found them dying and I chose to save them. That's the difference. You're asking me to give children to a criminal. I'm asking you to give children to someone who will protect them, someone who already has." Jae Min's voice dropped. "Your Honor, I know what I am, but I also know what I can do for these girls, and that has to count for something." The silence stretched. Judge Kim looked at her papers, at Dae Jung, at Jae Min, at the 2 girls sitting small and hopeful in the front row. "This court grants temporary custody to Jae Min for a period of 6 months," subject to strict conditions and social services oversight, counseling for the children, regular home inspections, any sign of danger or impropriety, and this custody arrangement will be immediately revoked. Relief crashed through Jae Min like a wave. Mr. Park, you may petition for review after the 6-month period, but only if you can demonstrate substantial rehabilitation and stable circumstances. Until then, you are prohibited from contacting the children. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell. Reporters exploded with questions. Dae-jung's lawyers immediately started filing protests. But Jae Min didn't hear any of it, because Christine had grabbed his hand. She looked up at him, this 8-year-old girl who'd survived more than most adults ever would, and smiled through her tears. Thank you, Jusi. The word, uncle, a term of respect for older men, felt wrong, too distant, too formal for what they'd been through together. Jae Min's throat tightened. Just call me Jae Min. Christine squeezed his hand harder, and together they walked out of the courthouse into a future neither of them could have imagined 3 weeks ago. The chapter transforms the story from save 2 girls from the cold to fight an entire legal and criminal system to keep them. The war isn't just with Dongseong, it's with the concept of rightful guardianship. This chapter shows Jae Min's transformation is complete. He's choosing the harder, legal path because Christine deserves better than being won through violence. Beautiful work building toward the courtroom battle. Ready for Chapter 7. The Reckoning in Court. Chapter 7. The Reckoning in Court. 800 words. The courthouse steps were a circus. News cameras, reporters shouting questions, protesters with signs, some calling Jae Min a hero, others demanding the children be returned to real family. The story had broken 3 days after Dae-jung's complaint was filed. Notorious Mafia boss fighting for custody of 2 orphaned girls. It had everything the media loved. Crime, children, moral ambiguity wrapped in a bow of public spectacle. Dong-sung had orchestrated it perfectly. Force Jae Min into a public legal battle where every aspect of his life would be examined, questioned, exposed. Make him look like a criminal trying to steal children. Turn his compassion into weakness that would destabilize his organization and embolden his rivals. Jae Min climbed the courthouse steps in a custom suit, his lawyer beside him, and knew he was walking into a war he might not win. The courtroom was packed, journalists in the gallery, Dae-jung sitting beside 2 expensive lawyers who had Dong-song money written all over them. And in the front row, Christine holding Stella's hand. Both girls dressed in new clothes that still couldn't hide how thin they'd become. Judge Kim Sun-hee entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a reputation for being uncompromising. She'd seen every angle, heard every lie, and had no patience for games. This is a custody hearing, not a media trial, she said before anyone could speak. I'm here to determine what's best for these children. Nothing else matters. Are we clear? Everyone nodded. Dae-jung's lawyer went first. Attorney Park was smooth, practiced, and devastatingly effective. Your Honor, this case is simple. Park Dae-jung is Christine and Stella's legal guardian, their only living blood relative. While his circumstances are imperfect, he represents family, continuity, cultural tradition. Park paused for effect. The petitioner, on the other hand, is a known criminal. His organization has been linked to racketeering, extortion, and violence. Is this the environment we want to place vulnerable children in? He presented documents, police reports, newspaper articles about Jae Min's alleged activities, a carefully constructed portrait of a dangerous man trying to play savior. Mr. Bruce, Park has acknowledged his gambling problem and is seeking treatment. He's their blood, their family. That has to mean something. Jae Min's lawyer, Ms. Choi, stood. A woman in her 40s with steel in her spine and 30 years of experience. Blood doesn't mean safety, Your Honor. Blood doesn't feed children or keep them warm. She pulled out her own documents. Park Dae-jung threw his nieces onto the street in January. He took their mother's savings, 3 million won meant for their care, and gambled it away. Christine and Stella survived 17 days on the street. 17 days of begging, scavenging, and freezing. One of them nearly died. She showed medical records, photos of Christine's frostbitten hands, Stella's malnutrition charts. My client isn't perfect, but he stopped when everyone else walked by. He saved their lives. And he's prepared to give them everything Mr. Park never could: safety, education, opportunity. The judge listened impassively. I'll hear from Mr. Park Dae-jung. Dae-jung took the stand, and Jae Min watched him perform. The apologetic uncle, the man who made mistakes but loved his family, the reformed gambler seeking redemption. It was a good performance. It might have worked if Christine hadn't been sitting 10 feet away, watching her uncle lie with the kind of hollow expression that came from knowing exactly how worthless those words were. And now, Judge Kim said, I'd like to hear from Christine. The courtroom fell silent. Christine walked to the witness stand, and she looked impossibly small, sitting in the chair meant for adults. The judge spoke gently, asking simple questions about where she'd lived, what had happened after her mother died. Christine answered in that same mechanical voice she'd used in Dr. Yoon's clinic. Facts, dates, details delivered without emotion, because emotion was a luxury she'd learned to bury. But then Judge Kim asked, Christine, do you want to live with your uncle? Christine's composure cracked. No. The word came out sharp and clear. No, Your Honor. Can you tell me why? Christine looked at Dae-jung, sitting smug beside his lawyers, and something fierce flashed in her eyes. He threw us away. When Mama died and we had nowhere to go, he took her money and said we were too expensive. He said we weren't worth feeding. Her voice grew stronger. We lived on the street for 2 weeks. Stella got sick. So sick I thought she was going to die. I tried to keep her warm, but I couldn't. I didn't know what to do. Tears started falling, but she didn't stop talking. And then he came. Christine turned to look directly at Jae Min. He stopped his car. He got out. He helped us when everyone else just walked past. Everyone else saw us and kept walking, but he stopped. Jae Min felt his throat constrict. He saved Stella. He saved me. Christine's voice cracked, raw with emotion. I don't care what he's done. I don't care about his past or his business or anything else. He's the only person who stopped. He's the only one who cared. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Kim's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes had shifted. Thank you, Christine. You may step down. Then it was Jae Min's turn. He took the stand knowing that everything he said would be used against him, by rivals, by police, by anyone looking for leverage. But Christine had just laid her heart bare. The least he could do was match her honesty. Mr. Jae, are the allegations about your criminal activities accurate? Some of them. Attorney Park looked triumphant. Ms. Choi winced. I've done things I'm not proud of, Jae Min continued. I've hurt people. I've broken laws. I've built my life on a foundation that wouldn't survive moral scrutiny. Judge Kim leaned forward. And you think this qualifies you to raise 2 young girls? No. The admission surprised everyone. Nothing qualifies me. I'm not a good man pretending to be one. I'm a bad man trying to do one good thing." He looked at Christine and Stella sitting in the front row. "But I can give them safety. Real safety, not the kind that disappears when bills come due. I can give them education, the best schools, the best opportunities. I can give them a future where they never have to choose between food and warmth, where they never have to sleep under bridges or beg strangers for help." Jae Min turned back to Judge Kim. "What can he give them?" He gestured toward Daejung. "Another cold street? Another winter wondering if anyone cares whether they live or die? He had them. He threw them away. I found them dying and I chose to save them. That's the difference. You're asking me to give children to a criminal. I'm asking you to give children to someone who will protect them, someone who already has." Jae Min's voice dropped. "Your Honor, I know what I am, but I also know what I can do for these girls, and that has to count for something." The silence stretched. Judge Kim looked at her papers. At Daejung, at Jae Min, at the two girls sitting small and hopeful in the front row. This court grants temporary custody to Jae Min for a period of 6 months, subject to strict conditions and social services oversight. Counseling for the children. Regular home inspections. Any sign of danger or impropriety, and this custody arrangement will be immediately revoked. Relief crashed through Jae Min like a wave. "Mr. Park, you may petition for review after the 6-month period, but only if you can demonstrate substantial rehabilitation and stable circumstances. Until then, you are prohibited from contacting the children. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel fell. Reporters exploded with questions. Daejung's lawyers immediately started filing protests. But Jae Min didn't hear any of it, because Christine had grabbed his hand. She looked up at him, this 8-year-old girl who'd survived more than most adults ever would, and smiled through her tears. "Thank you, Ajusi." The word, uncle, a term of respect for older men, felt wrong, too distant, too formal for what they'd been through together. Jae Min's throat tightened. Just call me Jae Min." Christine squeezed his hand harder, and together they walked out of the courthouse into a future neither of them could have imagined 3 weeks ago. The chapter transforms the story from save 2 girls from the cold to fight an entire legal and criminal system to keep them. The war isn't just with Dong-sung, it's with the concept of rightful guardianship. 7 years had a way of rewriting everything. The auditorium at Seoul National University's medical school was packed with proud families, distinguished faculty, and graduates in ceremonial robes. Jae Min sat in the 3rd row, uncomfortable in a charcoal suit instead of his usual black, trying not to let emotion crack the careful control he'd maintained for 47 years. It was failing, because Christine stood on that stage, 22 years old, top of her class, youngest graduate in the program's history, and she was about to give the valedictorian speech. Stella sat beside him, 12 now, and holding his hand with the casual affection of someone who'd never known a time when he wasn't there. She wore a navy dress for the occasion, her violin case tucked carefully under her seat. She had a youth orchestra performance the following week. 2nd chair, working toward 1st. "She's nervous," Stella whispered, reading her sister's body language from across the auditorium with the precision of someone who'd spent her entire conscious life learning Christine's tells. "She'll be fine," Jae Min said. "She's always fine." Christine approached the podium, and the auditorium fell silent. 7 years ago, she began, her voice steady and clear. I stood in a very different place. I was 15, still catching up on the education I'd missed, still learning what it meant to be safe. Her eyes swept across the audience. Hundreds of strangers, and the few people who mattered most. My mother, Lee Soo-jin, never went to college. She worked in factories, raised 2 daughters alone, and died before she could see us grow up. But she had dreams for us. She'd tell me, "Christine, you're going to be a doctor. You're going to help people. You're going to make the world better." Christine's voice caught for just a moment before steadying. "Mama, I did it. This is for you." Jae Min's throat tightened. But I wouldn't be standing here if not for a stranger who stopped when everyone else kept walking. Someone who gave me a second chance to honor my mother's dreams. Someone who taught me that family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose you when the world throws you away. Her eyes found his in the crowd. Held them. She didn't say his name, didn't need to. The applause was thunderous. Jae Min couldn't hear it over the roaring in his ears. After the ceremony, after the photos and the congratulations, and the well-wishes from professors who praised Christine's remarkable journey, they drove to the cemetery on the outskirts of Seoul, where Lee Soo-jin rested. It was a small plot, modest stone. Jae Min had offered something grander years ago, but Christine had refused. Mama wouldn't want anything fancy, just somewhere peaceful. The girls approached first, carrying flowers, white chrysanthemums and pink roses. They knelt together, and Jae Min watched from a respectful distance as they whispered to the headstone, sharing their achievements with a mother who'd never see them, but somehow always would. Christine's medical degree, Stella's upcoming recital, the scholarship Christine had earned, the competition Stella had won last month. Small triumphs and large ones, all laid at the feet of a woman who'd worked herself to death, trying to give them a future. Jae Min. Christine's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Come here." He hesitated. This was their moment. Their mother. "Please," Stella added, turning to look at him with those same eyes that had stared up from a frozen alley 7 years ago. Jae Min walked forward and knelt between them. Christine touched the headstone gently, reverently. "Mama, this is Jae Min. He's our family now." Her voice broke slightly. "I think you'd forgive him for everything if you knew he saved us. I think you'd thank him for giving us the life you wanted us to have." Jae Min placed his own flowers at the base of the stone, red roses, because Christine had once mentioned her mother loved them. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," he said quietly to the woman he'd never met. "But I promise I've protected them. I promise they'll never know the cold again." They sat in silence for a long moment, 3 people bound together by circumstance and choice, by tragedy transformed into something that looked like hope. As they walked back toward the car, Stella slipped her hand into his. "Are you coming to my recital next week, Appa?" The word still hit him like electricity. Appa. Father. 7 years of hearing it, and it still caught him off guard every single time, because he'd spent most of his life believing he'd never deserve that word, never earn the right to be called by it. "I wouldn't miss it," he said, squeezing her hand. "You said that about Christine's white coat ceremony, and you almost missed it because of that business emergency." Stella used air quotes, a gesture she'd learned from American movies and deployed with devastating accuracy. "I made it, didn't I? With 5 minutes to spare." Christine laughed, linking her arm through his other one. "He'll be there, Stella, even if he has to fight his way through half of Seoul to make it." They were right, of course. Jae Min still ran his organization, still controlled territory, collected tribute, made the decisions that kept his empire functioning, still operated in shadows, still carried violence in his wake, like a scent that never quite washed off. But these two girls, grown now, or nearly, breathed tomorrow into his world of yesterdays. Christine would start her residency at Seoul General Hospital in 3 months, specializing in pediatrics, saving children the way someone had once saved her. Stella would audition for the Seoul Youth Symphony's principal violinist position next spring, creating beauty in a world that had tried to teach her only cruelty. And Jae Min? He would watch them grow, protect them from the shadows they'd never saw. Build walls between them and his world so high that they'd never know what it cost to keep them safe. They reached the car, and Christine paused before getting in. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. You don't need to thank me. I do. I always will." She hugged him, quick and fierce, before sliding into the back seat beside Stella. Jae Min stood for a moment in the cemetery parking lot, looking back at the modest stone that marked Lee Soo-jin's grave. A woman he'd never met. A woman whose death had indirectly put her children in his path. A woman who'd given them life, while he'd given them a chance to live it. I hope I did right by them, he thought. I hope it was enough. The girls were arguing in the back seat about where to eat for Christine's celebration dinner. Stella wanted Italian. Christine insisted on Korean barbecue. They'd compromise on something neither wanted and both would enjoy, because that's what families did. Families. Jae Min got in the driver's seat and started the engine. For 30 years, he'd lived for power, for control, for the next territory to conquer, the next rival to crush, the next deal to close. He'd built an empire on fear and calculation, measuring his worth in how much others feared him. But Christine's graduation had taught him something he'd never understood until this moment. Power was having something worth dying for. Family was having something worth living for. And for the first time since he was 12 years old, watching his sister freeze to death in an alley he couldn't save her from, Jae Min understood the difference. He caught Stella's eyes in the rearview mirror, and she smiled, bright and uncomplicated. The kind of smile that only existed in people who'd never doubted they were loved. "Let's go home," he said, and he meant it. This chapter shows Jae Min's transformation is complete. He's choosing the harder, legal path because Christine deserves better than being won through violence. Beautiful work building toward the courtroom battle. Did any part of this story tug at your heart or bring something to mind? I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to share them in the comments below. If this story meant something to you, even softly, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe. Music. It helps keep these moments alive for all of us. And don't rush off. There are more inspiring stories waiting for you right here on the end screen or in the playlist. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm Flint, wishing you warmth, clarity, and the kind of love that doesn't need to be loud to be real. And music. I'll see you in the next story, my friend.